Coming up on today's show, Lola Phoenix is an American-born writer living in Sweden, working within digital marketing while trying to find an agent to represent their fiction work. Lola is the author of The Anxious Person's Guide to Non-Monogamy, the Non-Monogamy Journal, and Supporting Someone Polyamorous, as well as a weekly advice column and podcast called Non-Monogamy Help. Lola is also an amateur strongman athlete and has a special interest in fitness and nutrition science. When not writing books, Lola is either at the gym, taking walks in nature, learning about sciencey stuff, or baking new treats. Welcome to Loving Without Boundaries, where we hear inspiring stories, share actionable advice, and talk about the challenges and the joys of ethical non-monogamy and polyamory. I'm your host, Kitty Shambliss. Coming up, my conversation with Lola Phoenix. Welcome back to Loving Without Boundaries, where I am really excited to have what I think is going to be a beautiful conversation with Lola Phoenix, who has written The Anxious Person's Guide to Non-Monogamy, the Non-Monogamy Journal, and Supporting Someone Polyamorous. So really excited to have you here, Lola, and to get to know you better.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm excited for our talk. And I'd love it if you'd introduce yourself to our listeners in your own words, if you would.
Yeah, sure. So hi, I'm Lola Phoenix. As Kitty said, I wrote The Anxious Person's Guide to Non-Monogamy, the Non-Monogamy Journal, and Supporting Someone Polyamorous. I'm originally from the US, but I'm actually no longer an American. I live in Stockholm and Sweden, and I have previously also lived in the UK, and I'm a British citizen, which is very exciting. Hopefully I'm going to be a Swedish citizen one day. And I work sort of mainstream job in digital marketing, but I am passionate about writing in general. And the reason that I kind of got into writing about non-monogamy was that I also am like really passionate about helping people, and I was really a big nerd about human sexuality, and that sort of morphed into more of an interest in relationships and mental health and all things associated with that. And people found my responses to their questions helpful, and that just led me here, basically. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm really excited to continue to get to know you and your work. You just have lovely energy about you too. So that's awesome. So I love to ask what I call your light bulb moment, which is, and it could be one moment or a series of moments when, as you were growing up, whether young or even a young adult, you realize that maybe traditional heteronormative monogamy, or just kind of being quote unquote, normal, of course, with air quotes around it. And you were maybe a little bit different. I'd love to hear about that journey for you.
So this is really interesting because I actually remember growing up, like writing out like marriage certificates and divorce papers when I decided that I was no longer interested in Leonardo DiCaprio. I was now interested in Nick Carter, or vice versa. I can't really remember which one it was. So I think I was actually quite traditional in how I thought growing up. And I don't know if there was necessarily a light bulb moment, but I think it began from, I experienced sexual abuse and was really afraid of sexuality for a long time. I was very like sex repulsed almost. And I kind of gravitate sometimes towards like, oh, if I'm afraid of something, I want to learn more about it so that I can stop being afraid. And so human sexuality and sexual education became something that I got super, super interested in. And then that kind of led into, understanding more about kink, understanding more about BDSM, understanding more about, I think these things can kind of naturally lead on to different ways of questioning the norm, because I also grew up with queer relatives, and I also am bisexual myself and went on that whole journey. So I think it was part of that, but I think a moment that I kind of look back on and realize that like that was a moment when it should have been like an egg cracking moment, but wasn't really at the time because I didn't really get it, is that I was really, my first relationship that I ever had, the first time I fell in love, was a long distance relationship and I was so defensive about it. And, if anyone had said, because we hadn't met in person yet and I really loved him. And I think if anyone had said, like, oh, you don't really love that person, I would have been super defensive. And, it didn't really work out because it was long distance. He met someone else and was interested in them. And I didn't really mind. And that sort of kind of bit me in the butt a little bit because it was a very slow and painful breakup. But I think that was a moment where like that kind of I look back and I go, I didn't really mind. Like that wasn't an issue for me. It wasn't necessarily that I didn't experience any jealousy. I did, but I just didn't care. Like I was just like, well, fine, okay. I guess it wasn't that I mentally thought let's both date. I just thought maybe I'd get my turn later. But that was definitely a moment that I look back on and I go, that was a little bit of a sign that maybe it's not the whole sort of idea of it isn't for you, but the whole concept of like traditional relationships is slowly broken down for me because I began very much interested in hierarchical polyam, really interested in having lots of kids, and now I'm like relationship anarchist, solo polyam, not interested in kids at all. So my journey has like really changed over the years.
Wow, that's fascinating. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, and you touched on so many different things there, and having started reading your book, Supporting Someone Polyamorous, you also went through a lot of the definitions that you started talking about, like relationship anarchy, solo polyamory, all of that. So thank you for just sharing a little bit about your really, it sounds like deep and enriching experience, kind of experimenting with different parts of who you are. For our listeners, I heard you say that you also at this point identify as bisexual.
Mhm.
I'm curious, because of course that can feel very stigmatizing, or people can feel very alone, or like nobody really sees them or understands them. Was there a particular light bulb moment maybe around that might help our listeners just, feel seen or relatable?
I think, I played the home game, which I think many bisexuals have probably played, which is the straight people do that game. And it's where you kind of go through this, like, oh, well, yeah, maybe I want to kiss girls, but like straight girls want to do that. Like, yeah, maybe I'm interested in, doing some things, but straight people do that too. Like, that's totally a straight thing. And I think it's a little bit more complicated for me as well because I'm like somewhat on the A spectrum. Like, I kind of have a more responsive sexuality. I don't necessarily, I'm not super attracted to every single person that I meet, which not saying that all bisexuals are, but there is a kind of narrative sometimes of like, oh my God, everyone's so hot. Like I didn't experience that. So I think if you're like a little bit on my side, more on that kind of more of that experience, I think just think about like you might just have ironically the funny thing I would say is like you may have just not met the right person yet because it was that thing of like and then I was really attracted to this person who was also non-binary, and I was like, oh, I'd probably sleep with them, that might be interesting. And then I was like, oh wait, okay, maybe I am actually bi. But then when I came out to everybody, especially like a lot of people were like, yeah, we knew that. And you were just the only. So I think you're going to have that kind of journey and that's okay. But I think that one thing I think about if you're kind of unsure if you qualify or not, don't worry so much about that. I still have that kind of thing in my head, the like internalized biphobia of like, are you not bi enough or you haven't had this much experience? There must be this tall to ride type of thing. And you know what? There's no bisexual police coming by to like take away your card. So, and anyone that's trying to do that to you is like that's from their own insecurity. So like, I think the best advice that I ever got was actually from my friend Philippe, because I was really concerned, not necessarily about the bi label, but applying another label to myself. And I was like, well, I don't know if I'm enough to fit this label. And my friend Philippe was like, look, what do you mean by saying that you're this label? You mean to say by using this label, you mean that you are XYZ. But that is going to be true about you, regardless of whether or not you use that label or not. So focus less about like whether or not the label is right. And what does that say about you? Like, what are you trying to communicate with that? Because that is what's actually true. And that helps me a lot. Like, I worry so much less about like, some people are going to say I'm not this enough, I'm not that enough, whatever. Like, I'm just trying to communicate my experience. And that's really all I'm trying to do.
Mm-hmm. What a beautiful answer. I think that really will help a lot of our listeners. So I appreciate you sharing that. And I would just maybe on my side, just to add that it's also about you, like you said, you're expressing yourself and you get to decide that. No one else can decide that for you, so, and we're probably in two different generations, you and I assume. And for me, bisexual never really felt right.
Mm.
So I personally identify as heteroflexible. That just feels more applicable to me personally because I just kind of lean a little bit more towards the hetero, but still kind of on that spectrum. And also from what you were saying, I also identify as demisexual and sapiosexual. I don't know if you have those in your definitions because I didn't get that far into your book, but in case that helps anybody who's listening as well, so that I'm not putting it in my words, I'd love it if you maybe share, you see your head nodding, how you would define those words for our listeners in case that's helpful for them.
So demi is something that I've identified with as well a little bit, a lot. And demisexual, it's so complicated because when you define demisexual, you're saying basically that you don't experience sexual attraction with someone until you've had an emotional bond with them, or an emotional connection or something like that. And that can be really confusing for people because a lot of people will experience sexual attraction for people regardless of whether or not they have an emotional bond, but don't feel comfortable having sex with someone until they've had an emotional bond, which is actually very different. So if you're kind of listening to Demi and you're going, well, that's how everyone is, what specifically is different about it is that you can't really experience an attraction to anybody unless you have some type of emotional thing going on, more or less. I say bond. I think, it's basically like if you're looking at a bar of people, like, or you're in a bar and you're looking at a group of people, most people will go, oh, that person's hot. That person's hot. Like they can find one person. And for a demi person, or at least in my experience, I can't find anybody hot. The only time I will find somebody hot just by looking at them is if they look like somebody that I already find hot. Like that's only because they look like somebody that I already find hot. So, and it doesn't necessarily mean that I have to be like deep friends with them. I don't even have to know them necessarily. It can just be, someone that I've gotten to know by consuming their content, like it, and they've like been very personal about their life and their experience and their content. I can experience an attraction based on that. Or sometimes it tends to be friends because those tend to be people who you end up having an emotional connection with. So that's kind of like how I would identify, explain what demi is. And I totally understand for people who hear that initial first definition and just go, that's how everyone is. But it really is, it's very particular. It's that idea of like, you can't actually experience that sexual attraction until you have that, which isn't true for most people. And then sapiosexual is based upon like somebody's perception of intelligence. Like you tend to be attracted sexually to intelligence, and that can be really complicated in terms of what does that even mean? Intelligence isn't, what does intelligence mean, right? But that tends to be what that, like how sapiosexual is defined. So I don't remember if I defined those in my books because I don't know if we get into that level of granularity when it comes to sexuality. But when it comes to like, I understand sometimes it can also be frustrating to like feel like, oh my gosh, there's these new concepts and I don't really know, and I feel kind of stupid, and like, or I feel like, a little bit threatened, and because new things can be a little bit threatening. But the thing I would just encourage you to think about, if you're feeling a little bit like, oh, because I maybe it's because of my age as well, like even sometimes I've gotten to a point where I see a new word and I'm like, what, I'm behind, and then I take it personally. But it's okay. Like new words and new concepts and new ways of defining things are just ways that, like I said, we communicate our experiences to others because we ultimately want to be understood. And I think that that's true for anyone, even if none of these labels apply to them.
Beautifully said. Thank you for sharing that and putting it in your own words. I really appreciate that. And also, I didn't want to step over or not comment on that you did experience sexual abuse. So I just want to say I'm sorry that happened to you. And I want to honor you for really turning pain into purpose by then turning around and showing up with a lot of curiosity around human sexuality to then be in the place where you and I are talking after you've, written all these amazing books to help your fellow man, woman, non-binary person. So that's really awesome. So
thank you.
Yeah. And I'd love to, as you were stepping into living your most authentic life and that journey that you went on. What would you say are some of the challenges that you experienced, and how did you overcome them?
I think probably a big thing for me, and I think this happens to a lot of people in polyamory, is coming to the understanding that my way of going about love, or my way of defining love, or my way of defining attraction or interest or what a partner is, doesn't always match up with how somebody else does. And that can be really, really difficult, especially like I always tend to end up with people who are super interested in being like extroverts, like social. They like to go to parties, like to meet up with people. And I'm just so not that. And it was very difficult for me at first to not, to not assume that, okay, if I were to do this situation, if I were to be in this situation, this person would be my partner, or this person would be defined in such a way. And then to have partners in those situations who don't define it that way, who are like, well, no, I don't consider that person to be a partner because I define it in this way. And that can be really challenging because you're used to operating within a cultural script, especially within monogamy. You're used to different things being very clearly defined. And because monogamy is shown in every major media form, and there is no real depiction of polyamory that's positive, or it is, I think maybe there's like a few handful of examples, but they're not common. So you really have no script, and you really have no idea of how these things are supposed to go. And so sometimes you do hold on to things like, okay, well, if I go out on this many dates with this person, then this is what this means. And when you don't have that anymore, it can be really frightening. So I think that was like a big challenging thing for me. And also I think just, managing my emotions, learning how to ask for help, was huge, because I was okay. I can have conflict, like drag out, knock down conflict. Like I could curse someone out. I could, I could have relationship ending conflict, but I didn't know how to have healthy conflict. I didn't know how to say, I have a problem with this, and trust that I would be listened to. And that was a big learning thing, because a lot of times, like I would not, I say manipulate, but I wasn't trying to be manipulative. I was trying to like engineer situations so that I got what I want without having to ask for it. And
Mm.
that sometimes worked very well. Like it could work, but if it was in direct opposition to like something that my partner wanted, and I really needed something and I couldn't ask for what I needed, I would just end up kind of lashing out or saying something mean, or being kind of like up, like annoyed, or just grumpy. And then I luckily had a partner who could say, hey, you're kind of like, is there something you need? Like, I can tell that there's something wrong.
Mm.
And I think that was another big thing. So I think, yeah, the two big things, just understanding that not everyone is going to operate in the same way that I do. And it's not, one way isn't better or worse. It's just different ways to do things. And I don't have to be threatened by that. And then the other thing was just learning how to be like, how to ask for what I want, and how to have healthy conflict. That healthy conflict wasn't the end of the relationship, and it didn't have to be.
Hmm. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure, again, that's going to help a lot of our listeners, and very relatable and understandable, including to me. So I definitely resonate with that a lot. So I'd love to start transitioning over into how you, like, tell us how you started to get to where you are now, like where you started to write books and study human sexuality. So like, what was that journey like for you?
So I was lucky enough to go to an all women's liberal arts university called Mills College, which is now part of Northeastern University. And I was also like mildly interested in human sexuality beforehand, and was looking for ways, kind of like I got kind of involved more in sex positive groups. Luckily, I kind of found that, but it really kind of came to head when I went to uni, because we had a series of Mills 101 meetups that we'd have every Monday. And these were just like basic introductory different things where that would teach us, different stuff around the college, as well as just anything that we needed to know. And one of those was a like sex ed 101 led by a company called Good Vibrations, which is a toy
Mm.
store in
Mm.
San Francisco. And that was just like, it was so positive, and it was so, it wasn't about shame. It wasn't like, I think that was a big thing for me. And I started listening to like Dan Savage. I started listening to a lot of sex positive, podcasts and things like that. I started getting really involved in live journal communities. I started learning a lot. And then I don't think I ever intend to be an advisory person. Like I never really intended for that to happen. In all of the areas of like that I'm super interested in, it becomes something that maybe just because like if somebody asks a question, I want to answer it. But I ended up being like I knew a lot. And so I started commenting a lot more the more that I knew to share what I knew.
Mm.
And I think that, all the sex positivity stuff was kind of more into like okay, if you're kind of monogamous and open-minded, you still might be interested in things like threesomes. If and those became things that I was interested in, especially as I came out as bi and realized that like, oh, I'm bi. Then I also was like, well, I want to be able to have a girlfriend. And one of the earliest people that I was chatting to, and this was while I was also like considering moving to England as well.
Mm.
He was, I wasn't considering myself polyamorous, but I was like, okay, we can be in a monogamous relationship, but like, I want to have an experience with a woman at some point. Like, would that be something that you're okay with? And he's like, no. And I'm like, well, okay, then no to our relationship because, if it's never going to, I'm not going to say that that's never going to happen. Like, I want the chance, at least the opportunity. And so when I got more interested in that, I came across the polyam community. And I think initially I did very similar thing as to what happened with kind of like sexual health education. Sorry. And I started researching and learning as much as possible. But I think where I got to now was that I thought that researching everything would inoculate me against negative feelings, or I would become an expert and then I would be really good at it. And what I found often, and this is one of the reasons why I started writing my column or started writing things about polyamory, was that in practice, a lot of the things that I had learned from people didn't actually help and sometimes made things worse because it wasn't written from the standpoint of someone who had mental health struggles, at the standpoint of someone who carried with them like other issues of like social, like different experiences socially, sexual abuse, like didn't have experiences of like being poor growing up or things like that. Like it was from a completely different perspective. So I started writing about it. I started, being involved in polyamory communities, giving advice. Somebody, sent me a DM directly. It was on Reddit, actually, I think, and asked me for advice because they were like, I saw you answer this question. I just want to ask you. I don't want to ask anybody else. And I was like, oh, maybe I should like try making an advice column. And then I did that. And then I got a lot of letters. And then I was like, oh, I've always been interested in podcasting. I'd loved radio journalism. And I had like podcasts before. I produced like news podcasts before. So I was like, maybe I should make a podcast as well. So I did a podcast. And then after writing and doing my podcast for a while, Jessica Kingsley Publishers actually approached me and was like, would you be interested in writing a book?
Oh, wow.
And I was like, yeah, I could take because I have this article called like the 13 things I'd wish before trying non-monogamy. Or 13 things I've learned or something like that. And I was like, I could just make that into a book. But I wanted to focus it a lot on like doing non-monogamy while struggling with mental health issues. And originally I wanted to call it like How to Stick Your Dick in Crazy, but they were not keen on that title. They were not keen. So we went about on titles, and then The Anxious Person's Guide to Non-Monogamy came up. And I was like, I really like that. And they actually pushed back a little bit on it because they were like, well, this might be limiting. People might not pick it. And I'm like, no, like when you're trying non-monogamy, even people without mental health issues are going to be anxious. And I think that this will resonate with a lot of people. And so, we went ahead with it. But yeah, I think like that's roughly kind of how I got involved. I think a lot of what I write, and I think the polyamory community is so different now than it was when I first came out. Like when I first started like being polyamorous, I guess, in like 2010, 2011. I feel like there was a lot more stigma of jealousy. I feel like there was very much, even though people said there was no one right way to do polyamory, I feel like we very much thought the compersion was the best thing. And if you didn't experience it, there was something wrong with you. There was a lot more judgment and like the narrative of what I experienced, at least. And now I feel like there's a lot more kindness and compassion and, understanding that it's okay to have feelings. Because I feel like half the time with my column and podcast, I'm telling people it's okay to have feelings. And yeah, I think I wanted to write something as well for family members, because I witnessed like people, not necessarily, I always thought that either like your family was like 100% supportive or like disowned you. So,
Mm-hmm.
but I realized with an experience with a partner that had like complicated relationships with their family that like it's sometimes complicated, and sometimes people do mean really, really well, but they don't have all the verbiage, and it can be really tiring. And I also kind of experienced this a little bit with the trans community and like the non-binary community. Like sometimes you're going through a lot and you don't always have the words to like explain this or the energy to explain it. So that kind of came from that. And then I also ended up doing a course. Like I have a course called the polyamory fast track, because I also felt like a lot of people did what I did, was like they tried to do all this reading. And not to say you can't read or you shouldn't read, because like obviously I have books, I wouldn't say you shouldn't read.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of people think that if they do what I call like the polyamory PhD and they read for 6 months, that will like prevent them from making any mistakes. And I don't think that that's actually a really helpful thing. And I think way too many people when they're starting out are told, read this and that book, rather than there are practical things that I think that they can do, which is what I put together in my course. So yeah, like there's been a lot of things, but it's mostly just gone from like being super interested in it, to having these experiences and not wanting to feel alone in them, and writing about them, and then having people be like, this is my experience too, and I find this helpful, and me going, okay, well, I guess I'll do more of this since more people find it helpful,
Mm-hmm.
and then ending up where I am now.
That's so exciting. Yeah. I have you ever seen the movie The Matrix?
Yes, of
I
course.
love just the analogy of follow the white rabbit. That's kind of how
Hmm.
I went through my career, and it sounds like that's what you were doing too, kind of like following your curiosities and noting what was being helpful and finding joy in that and continuing on that path. That's really beautiful. I'm curious, when did the book The Anxious Person's Guide to Non-Monogamy, when did that come out?
I think that was in 2022.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think 2022 or 2023. And then both the journal and the Supporting Someone Polyamorous have come out this year. So it's been an eventful year.
A very eventful year. That's great. Yeah, and I was telling you before we started recording, it was this year that I had some of my clients tell me that they read The Anxious Person's Guide to Non-Monogamy and how helpful it was. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. I got to check that out. And yeah, and I love that now I get to speak to the authors. It's really exciting. I'd love to touch on each of your books briefly. So for The Anxious Person's Guide to Non-Monogamy, who would you say that's for? I mean, besides just kind of the obvious, where somebody's maybe a new person exploring non-monogamy and they are having feels, including anxiety. I definitely have struggled with anxiety. I would say even as a child, I used to have a worry stone that I would rub when I remember when I was like 6 or 7 years old. I was just kind of born a worrier, so that definitely resonates with me. But I'd love to hear from you. Like, who would you say that book is for?
I think that, it is kind of a lot of like things that I've gone through and things that I'm hoping that people who have had some experience within the polyamory community might find helpful. But I like my article that I wrote, like 13 things I wish I'd learned. I think it can still also be useful for a new person, because I do think that being new to it will like cause a lot of anxiety. So I think it's a combination. I think if you're looking for like a complete introduction, which is why like I wrote Supporting Someone Polyamorous a little bit different. Like if you're looking for a complete introduction to the terms and everything like that, I do have a glossary within the book, but like, I think if you're looking for like that kind of like polyamory 101 thing, it might not be the best thing if you're like completely new to it. But I think that like definitely if the idea gives you, if you want to try it, if you're interested in non-monogamy, and you feel a lot of that anxiety and you really want someone who like to feel like someone understands that, because I think that sometimes it can, especially if you're with somebody who's experienced or you kind of are jumping in, it can just feel like everybody else has everything figured out, and everybody else is like, yeah, I had jealousy, but I've solved it and it's fine, and now I don't have it. I definitely think that if you feel that way, if you kind of feel like your anxiety is holding you back, or you feel like you just want to know that somebody else has felt that way before, I think that it's really, really helpful for that. But I just hope, like, I know it's not going to be helpful for every single person. Like, different people are on different levels in their journey. I think I read something once where someone had read it because I wrote in the like initial part of the book that I was interested in non-monogamy because I wanted to have like 6 kids, and I wanted to have more than one parent because I was like, there's no way 2 people can like raise 6 kids all by themselves. And then they were kind of immediately turned off and like thought that the whole book was about like how to have a bunch of like kids and be polyamorous, which I don't want kids at all now. So I was like, no, that's not it. So please don't be turned off by that mention in the front half of the book. That's just my journey. But yeah, I think just it's not intended to be like an academic book. It's more intended to be something that's like, I've been through this. This is what I've learned in the process, and hopefully that will also be useful to you going forward.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. And what a wonderful resource. And I love, like you, I didn't even learn about the word polyamory until later on in life. I think I was about 38 years old when I first heard that word. And that was probably, I don't know, 17 years ago. And so there was hardly any resources out there at this time. And so you've put resources out there. I've put resources out there. Like there's so many people who care and want to help our broader community. And it's so incredibly beautiful. As I was reading the beginning of your book, Supporting Someone Polyamorous, you mentioned in there that you're estranged from some of your family. And I wanted to mention that partly because I'm sure, again, that can be very relatable with a lot of our listeners, because as we come out as polyamorous or bisexual, we may or may not find acceptance. We may experience rejection. And I'm also estranged from my sister at the time of this recording. I didn't come out as polyamorous until after my parents were no longer on this earth, so I didn't have to have that conversation with them. But I'd love if whatever you're comfortable sharing about that experience, and I'm curious if that fed into some of the work that you've done to kind of create community in a sense of family or chosen kinship around you, because I definitely feel that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, my estrangement didn't come from being polyamorous.
Mm.
Um, and I'd say that one family member that I'm estranged with, like one parent that I'm estranged from, happened when I was like 16. And that happened because basically issues with like child support and money was more around that. But as I think about the relationship that we had, I think that there would have eventually been clashes anyway, even if that wasn't the reason why. Like I can't foresee, knowing what I know now about the way that they behaved towards me and towards other people growing up, that I would have been all that comfortable with any other relationship that we had going forward. I think I very much saw them I put them on a pedestal growing up that I don't think that I should have, they were my parents. So of course I did.
Right.
And then when it comes to my other parent, that is more around, I started getting therapy in grad school, and I started basically kind of over time learning that maybe this wasn't the healthiest relationship. Maybe this wasn't very good. And slowly over a process, because the family member that the parent that I'm estranged from has mental health issues of their own. So I slowly kind of began stepping away. And as I said, like I'm not, and this is probably why I'm not very good at healthy conflict. And so having that confrontation with them of like, this is the way that you've treated me. I don't like this. I think that I want our relationship to change. And namely, I want you to go to therapy. That only got to happen through like this sort of explosive disagreement. So it became more about the explosive disagreement that it became about like, actually, now that we've brought something up, I'm going to bring, which, I'm not going to fault myself too badly for, because I really genuinely didn't know how to bring this up. And I was genuinely afraid to, because I thought that if I brought this up, it would end our relationship. And it did. So I wasn't wrong. So I think none of these were really around polyamory in particular, but that one parent that I was estranged to a bit later, probably around when I was like 25 or 26, that they did know that I was with someone and we were polyamorous at the time. And so I did experience a little bit of them sort of assuming that we were like being afraid that it was my partner's idea to be polyamorous. It wasn't, it was mine. I didn't open whilst I was in a monogamous couple, but I sought polyam relationships and they really hadn't heard of polyam before they met me. So it wasn't their idea, it was mine. And sort of the idea, especially like, even though I'm non-binary, the idea that like, oh, who I dated identified as a man at the time, that they're just sowing their wild oats and like leaving me home alone, like wept in the kitchen or what, like, I don't know, that kind of picture of that. It's this man running around, fraternizing, and I've just gone along with it because I'm a poor sappy woman or whatever. And I'm like, no, that's not the case. So I had a little bit of that experience, but like I said, I thought because I had this estrangement, and by the way, if you are experiencing estrangement, like I'm kind of okay, like I've had enough therapy. It happened quite a long time ago. It's a wound that I don't think really ever heals, because I think that you just get reminded of it at times, and it's quite painful, but it's something that I can cope with now. But I can't recommend, there's a podcast called Calling Home, and a person called Whitney Goodman. And she puts out a lot of great information about estrangement. And because I think it's definitely something that is not talked about enough. And the response that you usually get from a lot of people is, oh, well, they're your family, they love you. And people don't really get it. So like, I would definitely recommend checking Whitney's stuff out. But because I'd gone through this estrangement, I really thought that like, okay, either you were completely estranged from your family, or you had a great family and they were always supportive, because I hadn't really seen complicated relationships. And I guess I just didn't really think about my relationship with mine as like, I just thought of it in this very black and white way. And then, like I said, I had partners who had much more complicated relationships with their family. And my experience in the trans community of like supporting LGBTQ youth, I was an LGBTQ youth support worker for 10 years
Wow.
in London, and it was a peer sexual health educator as well. And so I came to learn that like, it's not necessarily always that somebody just accepts you completely or rejects you. There can be kind of really complicated things, people who genuinely mean well, but you're so exhausted and tired of trying to explain this all the time, and you don't want to be in that position. And so I think like I kind of looked at the resources that were available, and I was like, like there isn't really very much available for like someone who is wanting to be supportive but doesn't know. And like, yeah, you could tell them to read The Ethical Slut or something, or you could tell them to read my book or any other book, but that's really meant for somebody who's interested in polyamory, right? Like that's not really meant for a family member who doesn't need to know every bit of information. And that may also lead to them asking more personal sexual questions, which you may not want to answer. So the idea around that is like, well, I know the ways that I wish that I was supported. And I also did talk and interview some people who had various different experiences, and read through a lot of stories of like how people, like I put out a survey and I asked lots of people, like, what's your experience on this? Just so I could see like there's all kinds of different things. It's not just you're accepted completely or you're rejected completely. There's lots of complications. So I wanted to put together something that someone could just hand to someone that did really care about them. Like I don't think I can make someone care about you if they don't care about you, unfortunately. But somebody that is genuinely wants to support, but just doesn't know anything about all this, and is genuinely scared for their family member, and not because they think, they don't know anything about polyamory. So of course they're scared. And so I wanted to build something like that was, I originally wrote out a little guide on my website, but then I was like, actually, there's so much information that I can't just put on one page. Like there's so much there.
Right.
So I ended up going like, maybe I could like write something more extensive. And that's kind of like how that ended up happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and again, thank you for putting in the time and the energy and the effort. I know how much work it is to put a piece of work out there. And, I don't know if you had to get through imposter syndrome in the beginning or, and just the sheer level of work that's involved. So thank you for putting that piece together. And I love too that you highlighted that you can't make somebody care about somebody else. It broke my heart, but even just this past weekend, somebody who grew up in a very conservative type of family setting, and there's also cultural things going on in that space, told me that they don't plan to ever tell their parents that they're polyamorous because they know that they will get disowned immediately. It just broke my heart. So like that's probably people that are not open to reading that book. But being able to know the nuances of how to decide even who is safe to come out to. But then now to have different resources that you can give them is really a beautiful thing. So thank you for that. Now, I was curious, have you heard of Dr. Elizabeth Sheff's book, When Someone You Love is Polyamorous?
I have heard of that one.
Yeah.
But I thought, um, I think it's not, I mean, I heard criticisms as well, because I kind of looked up that book and like looked up like, okay, what are people saying that's super helpful about it? What are people saying that it's lacking? Like, obviously I can't, and I make that really clear, I hope in the beginning, that I can't cover all perspectives, and I can't, possibly represent every single person. But my hope is that, like, it's something that can build on that, and it's something that can, really, really help, like, just something you can give to someone who's just completely clueless about
Right.
anything, that
Mhm.
and it will hopefully point them into, there still might have additional questions, but and I put questions, like, the way that the book is structured is like there's an intro section with like basic terms, explanations of things when you should be concerned, because you can still be in an abusive relationship even if it is polyam.
Mhm.
And then kind of like the typical questions that you might get of like, what about the children? And like,
Right.
why can't you just be monogamous? And like, does this mean your partner doesn't really love you? And like all these sorts of things.
Mhm.
I'm sure there are more questions that there's a million questions that people get asked, but the idea is that they could pick and choose. They could read all of the questions, or they can pick and choose the ones that they've asked. And
Mhm.
then it kind of has like an end section where, how do you show your support? Like, how do you actually show up? Right? Like, okay, I've addressed your concerns, hopefully, and kind of hopefully maybe expanded your mind a little bit, because sometimes when you are talking about these questions of like, does this mean your partner doesn't really love you? Like, okay, you have to talk about like, what does love mean? What does commitment mean? What, like,
Yeah.
you get really esoteric sometimes in these
Mhm.
discussions. And my hope is that they'll even start to think about expanding. Not that I think it's going to turn your parents polyamorous, but like, maybe they'll think about how do they define romance? Like, how do they
Uh,
define these things? Question some things that were maybe they never thought to question before. And just point them in a right direction of like, hopefully my goal is that like the next time, either they may not completely understand you, because they may not completely get it. Like, I don't get being an extrovert. I don't get it. I'm not going. I don't get seeing a party and going like, this is the best experience. I don't get it. That's fine. They don't have to get it,
mhm.
and that's from my also experience of like working with trans youth and like working with parents who genuinely want to be supportive, but like they get tripped over the idea that they must understand exactly what's
Mhm.
going on in someone's head. Like, you don't have to understand, but the point is that they'll hopefully know what to do to stand by you, and hopefully and advocate for you, hopefully, in those
Mhm.
situations. So yeah, I heard about, I wanted to like do something a little bit more extensive as much as possible. Hopefully it makes a great companion, like as
Sure.
many resources as possible that there are. I think the better, really.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, because I mean, before I felt like there was just that one guide, that one book. It's almost written pamphlet style because it's quite small. So I love now that there are multiple resources, and I saw in your book, I think it was 176 pages. So that would say a lot about your loved one to be willing also to read 176 pages, but that would also help me to feel really safe,
Mhm.
if my loved one was willing to do that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And they can read all of it, or they can just like, if you have specific questions, if they've said like, what about the children? You can open up to that chapter and you're like,
Right.
here, there is about the children.
I love that. I love that. I even have an article about that on my blog because that also just comes up so much. If you
Yeah.
had to give even just one or two bits of wisdom to a loved one who is maybe listening to our episode here, who wants to be supportive to their polyamorous family member or loved one, is there anything you could kind of little nugget that you could provide?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a thing that I would advise anybody who is, when their child is, and I'm not a parent, so like I may have this wrong, but I think I can wrap my mind around it. When your child is going down a path that is not a pre-prescribed path that society has kind of laid out for them, you're going to naturally be afraid of them. They're afraid of what's in store for them. You can't protect them. You don't know how to advise them. You don't know how to help them. And it's okay that you feel that fear. Feeling that fear doesn't mean that you're a bad person. And also kind of, wishing that they didn't have, like, even going like, I wish, it's not that I don't want them to be themselves, but I don't I don't want them to have to face all of this. I don't want to have them to have to deal with being different in this society and in this specific way. Like, that's okay. But I think what you can really do is you can always be that space that they're always safe and accepted in. And that is actually the more important thing. It's not important that you get all the words right. It's not important that you say everything right. You can be, I remember a family member of mine that before I even realized that I was non-binary, they gave me this present, and it was a very feminine sort of thing. They specifically, what they said to me, they looked at the present, they looked at me and they said, I think it might be a little bit too sissified for you. And even though that wasn't the right way to say it, right. That's not the preferred nomenclature. It was a sign that they kind of understood in the best way that they knew how. So I think if you can you're not going to be able, no matter, even if your child does take the path that society has said works out for them, all sorts of stuff can happen. You're never ever going to be able to protect someone from experiencing negative things or experiencing pain or anything of that. But if you can be that safe space for them, that will be way more meaningful in the long run than getting every single word right. Because you can get the parents that I'm estranged from do use the right pronouns for me. So you can get every word right and still not be that space. So focus more on always providing that space than trying to get everything right.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I that resonates with me as well. I have 2 trans nieces and I see their parents struggling sometimes. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And I want to just touch on briefly for our listeners as another resource for them. Can you just describe a little bit like what the Non-Monogamy Journal, like who is that for? What's its purpose, your goal with that?
So the Non-Monogamy Journal is really based off of the fact that when we grow up in a monocentric society, we technically role play a lot in our heads of like what our ideal is and how we would respond to different sort of scenarios that happen within monogamy, because we act these things out through games in childhood, or we see these scenarios play out in media and in, TV shows and in dramas and books. Like, we see so many different things happen and like how other people respond, and we think how we would respond. And this gives us a lot of grounding. Even if, if you're cheated on, you're not going to be happy about that. It's not going to feel great. But because you've seen that represented before to you as a scenario, it's less shocking than it would be if you never knew that it was possible. So with the Non-Monogamy Journal, my goal was like, I'd seen so many different scenarios from writing my columns and like so many different things, both common and uncommon, that people had run across. And what I found is that for a lot of people, it was a combination of the initial shock of the scenario or the initial problem that they had, but also the fact that they had never come across this before. They couldn't ask family members about it. They couldn't ask friends about it. They had no way of knowing what was normal, what was not. Like, they didn't even have the ability to think through this as a possibility before it happened to them. So the idea with the journal is like, if you're kind of like trying to figure out your boundaries, trying to figure out like, how do I want to be? There's multiple ways to be non-monogamous. It's not just one way. So what you can do with the journal is it goes through a series of scenarios, and it talks about like, okay, what would you do in this scenario? If you were the opposite, if you were your partner in this scenario, what would you do? And it gives you a chance, either by yourself or with a partner, could be interesting to do with a partner, to think through how you would respond to different scenarios and what your boundaries may actually be. Because I think one good example for me is like, which I think is probably one of the scenarios in the book, is that I kind of entered a scenario where a partner that I had was interested in somebody that they knew was cheating. They knew that person was in a monogamous relationship with somebody, but was cheating on that person.
Oh, yeah.
And then I was like, well, wait a minute. Like, I am not comfortable. I would never be comfortable helping someone cheat, but my partner was. My partner was like, it's not my business. And I'm like, wait a minute. I don't know how I feel about this. Like, and it really came down to like, okay, are you going to break up with your partner because they're helping someone cheat, even though they're not technically cheating on anybody? But then I think I would have had that discussion beforehand with them. Like, I would have thought about like, okay, actually, maybe this is a boundary for me. Maybe this is like, listen, not only do I not only cheat on anybody or help anyone cheat, but I'm not interested in anyone who also helps people cheat. And maybe that's something that I need to bring up earlier in a relationship, because I don't know how I feel about it, because I almost felt so much like, how can I stand by? Like, I'm a bystander. Now I'm an accomplice in this act in a way. So I think things like but you never see that represented in any form of media. So why would,
Right.
it was the shock of the situation, as well as like, I've never thought about this as a possibility before. And so things like that, like, I'm hoping that by going through it, you get an idea of like, oh, this is a thing that can happen. How would I react? And also think about like some of the baseline things about like sexual health, STI risk, and how do you negotiate that? And how do you know that when you think an activity is risky, that your partner also agrees that it's risky? Like, do you have a shared definition of risk? So it's meant for people who have like some experience to, but it could be someone new to it as well, who really want to figure out like, almost test themselves and put themselves in different situations and scenarios and see how they might respond, so that they have a better idea of like, okay, I'm really kind of firm in like what my values are and what my boundaries are going to be, and things like that. Like, it's meant to help, guide you through that.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like a wonderful resource. And thank you for giving that example, because being in the work that I do, I hear about that all the time, from my own personal life, but also talking with clients in our community is, that, what is cheating and what happens if, the exact scenario that you just described. So I really appreciate you bringing it up and airing it here so that, people can again feel seen and understood and be asking these critical questions, of themselves too, to figure out what are my boundaries around this, what's okay to ask and request of other people, and to be able to, say no or say yes, or say, I have some concerns I want to talk about, and be able to have those discussions. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. So I really appreciate the conversation. I'd love to hear like what's next for you. What are you excited about, or any message that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I'm excited about like, I'm hoping that like I get more. I'm new to kind of the idea of teaching something. Like, I've done a lot with my books, like the course that I'm starting. I spent a lot of time putting it together, and I had a lot of therapist friends that I have vetted, and that whole, like, that definitely came with way more imposter syndrome than almost anything that I've ever done before. But already I'm starting to like have a little bit of one-to-one meetings with students, which I don't usually do. Like, usually people write to me, I give them advice, and then I don't know if they take my advice or not. And that's one of the reasons why I don't think I would be a good therapist, is that I don't, if people don't take my advice, I don't know like what to do with that. But I really love, like, so far it's been really interesting to kind of like, I really like helping people, and I really like being able to help someone figure out like, and help that sort of feeling when they sort of say like, oh, I'm glad that I'm not the only one, or I'm glad that I'm not, that you've experienced this too, or it's have those unlock moments that I've had during therapy. So I am hoping to have, as trepidatious and as nervous as I sometimes am about like the course and getting those like one-to-one meeting with students, I am really happy to like do that. I even feel hesitant to say students, because I'm like, I'm not a teacher. But like, I'm really excited about that. I'm looking also into like more collaborations and working with people who are therapists, and seeing about like what resources we can produce for people in like, not just therapy, but in like all service industries, because I think that there's I think a lot more people are interested in non-monogamy in various forms. And so I think people are going to really need to know how to, be supportive people and service positions who are in non-monogamy. So I'm excited about that. And yeah, in general, like, I am a writer. I love, I write fiction as well. And I hope that maybe one day I can find an agent for my fiction stuff. So if that would be a great thing to develop. But yeah, I think those are more or less the things that I'm excited about right now. And just, I'm hoping, like, I've already heard like some feedback from someone who I sent the book to like see if they'd like it and see if they'd promote it. And she said, I've already given it to a family member, and I've already felt like that they understand me better. So I love hearing things like that. Like, I always sign off my columns and podcasts by saying, I hope this helps and good luck. And genuinely, like, I hope that whatever I put out there helps people in whatever way. Because that's, what I enjoy doing.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Well, your heart, your compassion, your desire to help, how caring you are, it really comes, crystal clear through our conversation here. And I'm just delighted to get to know you. And it's been a great conversation. So thank you for taking the time to have it with me. So where can people learn more about you and your work?
Everything is at nonmonogamyhelp.com. And I do have a Instagram at non-monogamy help and a TikTok at non-mono-help. Someone else parked non-monogamy help. And no, I will not buy it from you. And I am on X technically, but I don't really use it very much anymore. And I'm very hesitant to get any more social media profiles, but those are the main ones that I'm on. And I do run like Q&As. I do a lot of collabs on Instagram with other polyam creators. And I'm always interested in doing more collabs with people if people are interested. I'm always hesitant to ask because I'm like, well, who am I to ask for a collaborator? That's where I get the imposter syndrome. So if you are a creator and you want to collab with me, let me know. And yeah, if you're a literary agent and you want to, not to plug that, but like always interested in that as well. So yeah, that's where you can find it.
I'm totally cool you putting that out into the universe here at our podcast. So, well, Lola, it's just been an absolute, just a wonderful conversation. Just thank you again for your time and your care and your positive intentions and all of the work that you've already done and all of the work that I know you're going to do in the future. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If you like what you heard, are struggling with some aspect of your relationships, and you're interested in seeing if you're a fit to work with me as your relationship coach, here's what I invite you to do next. Head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. That's lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply and book a call to speak with me. I'll get on the phone with you for about 45 minutes and we'll get you crystal clear on 3 things. Number 1, exactly what's not working well in your relationships right now. Number 2, ideally where you'd like to be and what might be getting in the way. And number 3, the exact strategy to get you there, helping to close that gap. Remember, creating healthy, open relationships does not typically happen by itself. Many often need expert guidance to make it happen. We've helped clients all over the world to feel safe, happy, and secure in open relationships while not losing their mind or their cherished partners. To see if we can help you do the same, head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. I'm Kitty Chambliss, and let's talk soon.